Brazil is the country of the future, but it seems like we've been hearing that for a long time. Lately, though, we've heard a lot about the country's corruption scandals, the economic crisis it is going through, or the street violence in cities like Rio de Janeiro. But there is something even more important about this country, something that doesn't appear very much in the media. Brazil is the most expensive country in all of South America. Yep, you heard that right. If you go shopping in a city like Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro, you'd better be ready to clean out your wallet because it will be as expensive as New York or London. The Brazilians even have a name for this. They call it Custo Brazil. This is the special charge you have to pay for living in the country of samba. So let's look at an example, the Big Mac burger that you buy from McDonald's. If you've been subscribed to VisualPolitik for a long time, you already know that the economists use something called the Big Mac Index to measure the cost of living in a country. For example, in Switzerland, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, the Big Mac costs a whopping $6.75. Then we have Peru, a poorer country where the burger only costs $3.23. Fair enough, right? Well, in Brazil, the Big Mac costs $5.10. It's more expensive than in Denmark, the UK, or Canada. According to the Expatistan.com website, Sao Paulo is the most expensive city in South America, with prices as high as Houston, Texas, Berlin, or Germany. And now you might wonder, given the high cost of living, how high are Brazilian salaries? Are they wealthier, say, than Colombians or Chileans? Well, absolutely not. The average wage in Brazil is less than $600 a month. Argentinians and Chileans are actually better off in this regard. So the real question here is, why is Brazil so expensive? What are the reasons why a middle-income country has the prices of a wealthy one? Well, today we are going to answer this question, and believe me, this also partly explains the Brazilian crisis too. So let's dive in.
An isolated economy.
Many of you might think of Brazil as a country open to free trade, right? Well, at the end of the day, many foreign companies like MasterCard or Barclays have a strong presence in this country. Nonetheless, Brazil has the highest tariffs in South America. So what does this mean? Well, imagine we have a cell phone manufacturer in America and they wanted to sell on the Brazilian market. Since our product is made abroad, we must sell it with a special tax that can reach up to 35% of its market price. As you can imagine, this type of policy has a pretty big impact on everyday life.
Nintendo exits Brazilian market due to high tariffs.
Yes, you heard that right. During those years, Brazilians who wanted to buy a Wii or a Nintendo DS had to travel to Uruguay in order to find one. Interestingly, this was a great advantage for Nintendo's biggest rivals, especially Microsoft and the Xbox. And you know why? Well, Microsoft has a factory in Brazil where the Xbox One is made. This means they don't have to import it, and therefore it doesn't have those high tariffs. And yes, I know what you're thinking. High tariffs are cool because they force companies to build factories in your country and employ your citizens, right? Well, think twice there. When Microsoft opens that Brazilian factory, they still need to import all the machines and materials needed to manufacture that Xbox One. This can be plastic, semiconductors, robots. Many of these things are made somewhere else. And if they are made somewhere else, they still have these special tariffs. And you can guess who pays for these extra costs. Of course, it's the consumer. This explains why so many products manufactured in Brazil are so expensive.
Want an example? Take the Volkswagen Golf. In Mexico City, this car costs around $15,000. In Sao Paulo, it costs $25,000. All of this despite the fact that this specific model of automobile is manufactured in Sao Paulo.
But wait a minute, because this is not the only thing that explains this Custo Brazil, or what the Brazilians use to refer to this incredibly high cost of living.
Logistic Custo.
Let's imagine someone doing soy agriculture in the state of Pará in the north of this country. If he wants to send his soy to Sao Paulo, he must carry it on trucks through the highway BR-163. This highway has over 1,000 kilometers, and 100 of it are not even paved. A simple rainy day is enough to keep those trucks stuck in the mud. And this is just one example. In fact, Brazil has some of the worst infrastructure in the world. Even India has better roads. So to make a comparison, anytime an American farmer sells $100 in soy, he has to spend $9 on transportation. The same farmer in Brazil, he'd have to pay $25. Since they have no good roads, Brazilians have to invest in expensive trucks that break down quickly and make the cost even more expensive. And of course, all of this means higher and higher prices for Brazilian customers. But now you might be wondering, well, why is the Brazilian government so reluctant to pay for infrastructure? At the end of the day, Brazil has state-of-the-art engineering companies like the Odebrecht Group. If you happen to be someone watching from a South American country, well, this name probably rings a bell for you. Odebrecht was the biggest engineering and construction company in the region. And I do say was here because they had the biggest corruption scandal in the history of the continent. And naturally, with that, the future of the firm is looking pretty dim. But this story does explain well why Brazil has such poor infrastructure. Because at the end of the day, part of the money goes towards bribes and corruption. But not only that, when the Brazilian government wanted to modernize their country, well, what did they do? Well, they decided to host the Olympic Games and the FIFA World Cup. So today, Brazilian cities can congratulate themselves for having the most beautiful sports arenas with high-end technology and luxurious decoration. Today, taking a walk in the center of Sao Paulo feels like being in a sci-fi movie. But outside of this metropolis, the railroads are abandoned, the highways are unpaved, and several neighborhoods don't have a single bus line that connects them with the city center.
Brazil's woeful infrastructure costs the economy as much as $48 billion per year.
Now, of course, this affects the prices for Brazilian consumers, but also for worldwide consumers who want to buy Brazilian goods. But that is something we're actually going to address in a future video. Because now the question really becomes, how can someone who makes $600 a month spend $25 on pizza at an average restaurant in Sao Paulo? Well, I am going to tell you how.
Predataholics.
For decades, Brazil had some of the highest inflation in the world. During the 1980s and 90s, they had more than 6,000% inflation. This means if you had a beer at a Rio de Janeiro bar in 1980, you would pay 100 cruzeiro. The cruzeiro was the Brazilian currency back then. 1 year later, that same beer would cost 600,000 cruzeiros. As you can imagine, hyperinflation created unique consumer behavior. Behavior that was quite different from the rest of the world. In order to survive, Brazilian ships got used to selling with installments, and this is still a thing today. If you go to any Brazilian shop, you can see that next to the price it says something like 10x, 12x, or 20x. This number means that you can pay for this product on 10, 12, or 20 installments. In other words, the question many Brazilians ask themselves is not whether this TV or this suit is more or less expensive, but if they can pay for it during the next 2 years. And as you can imagine, when you buy something in installments, it is far more expensive. For example, on the screen, we're showing you a smartphone on a Brazilian e-commerce website. If you buy it at once, it costs 632 reais, which is equivalent to $202 at the moment we made this video. Nonetheless, if you buy it with installments, it costs $217, which is a 7% increase. So as you can imagine, your average Brazilian is in debt all the time.
Nearly 60% of Brazilians in installment debt.
But wait just a minute, because this is not the worst of it. In the last year, something has happened in Brazil that has turned Custo Brazil into a real nightmare.
Credit card hell.
At the beginning of the 2000s, Brazil was the perfect market for foreign banks. Big financial firms like Santander or Credit Suisse started investing in the country. And don't forget, we're talking about a 200 million person country that was on the rise here, where prices were high and people were used to paying for things in installments. In other words, Brazil was a paradise for selling credit cards.
Since 2005, Brazil's credit card market has grown at a 20% plus rate annually.
By the year 2012, Brazilians had an average of 2 credit cards per person, and they really knew how to use them. Brazil was the country with the most credit payments across all of South America. Nonetheless, that happiness didn't last very long.
Brazilian consumer default on credit cards has reached 27% in April 2012.
In that very same year, 2012, the alarm started to sound in all those Brazilian banks. The country was in the middle of a crisis with rising unemployment and declining salaries, and that made it hard for Brazilians to pay back their debts. So, what happens when a bank is afraid of getting defaulters? Well, they raise the interest rates.
Brazilians have to pay 414% interest on their credit cards.
So imagine you use your credit card to buy a TV screen that costs you $1,000 and you pay for it in 12 installments. Well, at the end of the day, counting the interest rate of the credit card, the TV costs around $5,000. Pretty impressive, isn't it? And don't forget that the average wage in Brazil is less than $600 a month.
In other words, no matter the anti-poverty measures taken by the government, most Brazilians are struggling to survive.
And worst of all, since they can't save money, losing a job can be a real tragedy for many.
Homeless population in Rio de Janeiro increases 150% in 3 years.
So here is the question now. Can Brazil get over this situation? Who could possibly reform this country? Well, we'd love to know what you think, so please leave your answer in the comments section below. Also, do not forget to check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. Also, I've got a new channel. It's called Biographics. We do biographies of notable people from history as well as the present day. You can find a link to that in the description below. And also, don't forget that here at VisualPolitik, we publish brand new videos every week, so please do subscribe and you will not miss a post. Also, if you like this video, give us a thumbs up, and as always, I'll see you next time.
And if you want to learn more about politics and hear even more of my lovely voice, you can join us at Reconsider Media. We have a podcast at reconsidermedia.com/podcast. See you there.